Hello. Thank you for joining us for today's session, Scheduling Lessons Learned from Transitions Across Learning Environments. This session is part of the larger Accelerated Learning Project, which provides a modular set of tools, resources, and both synchronous and asynchronous webinars and professional development opportunities that are designed to support schools and district leaders in planning for the opening of the 2021 school year. Just as a note of record keeping, this session is being recorded so that those that weren't able to join us this morning or today are able to view it for later. For today's session, we have brought together educational leaders from a broad range of school settings to talk about scheduling and transitions, what worked, what didn't work, how they made and communicated decisions, and at the end, what is their best advice for moving forward into the new school year? Let me share. My name is Dr. Jeffrey Fuller, and I'm the new Director for the Bureau of School Support at the Pennsylvania Department of Education, and I'll serve as your facilitator for this morning's conversation. Joining us as panelists from the Brentwood Borough School District, Superintendent Dr. Amy Birch and Middle School Principal Mr. David Radcliffe. From the Elizabeth Forward School District, Superintendent Dr. Todd Karuskin. From the Freedom Area School District, Middle School Principal Ryan Smith, and joining us a little bit later, High School Principal Mr. William Deal. From the Northgate School District, we have Dr. Chris Caton. Did I pronounce that correctly? Thank you. Who is the Director of Curriculum and Assessment. Unfortunately, Dr. Johns and Mrs. Smith weren't able to join us this morning. And from the West Allegheny School District, we have Dr. Jerry Lynn Lippert, who is the superintendent of that school district. In just a minute, I'm going to ask our panelists to tell us a little bit about their district and some of the local conditions that they faced in making their situation unique, and those things that had an impact on scheduling and transitions. And for the purpose of our discussion this morning, when we're talking about scheduling and transitions, we're talking about both the big picture of transitioning between instructional models, whether all of your students were in session or you were on a hybrid or a scaffolded model, and the more specific look at what are some of the decisions that districts have to make regarding specific buildings. For instance, when Mr. Deal joins us, he's the high school principal of a school that is on a block schedule. And so that makes things a little bit different when we're talking about scheduling. As I said, in just a minute, I'm going to ask our panelists to introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about their district. While they're doing that, I'm going to ask those of you who have joined us for the session to take a minute and go to the chat box and just type in for us your name, your role, and your LEA, so we have a better idea of who's joining us for this morning's session. So let's get the conversation started. Dr. Birch and Mr. Ratcliffe, talk to us a little bit about Brentwood Borough.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having us. I think perspective is really important as far as when we talk about strategies, because the strategies that work for us may not work in your district. So Brentwood, before the pandemic, had about 1,200 students. After the pandemic hit and coming into this school year, we were down to 1,039 students. That was a pretty significant decrease. Those students left our classrooms and went fully online, either in our cyber charter or in one of the other cyber charters that were in pre-existence before that. Brentwood is only 1.5 square miles wide, so we are a walking district, which makes us really unique. We have 2 elementary buildings and 1 middle high school. Mr. Radcliffe, why don't you explain a little bit as to how the middle high school is set up for everybody?
Thanks, Dr. Birch. Our middle high school is a 6 through 12 building. We're under one roof, but we're basically in 2 separate wings. One of the challenges, obviously, with planning and scheduling is at the middle high school, we do share a significant amount of our staff. In terms of our core areas, we have core teachers that are primarily middle school or high school, but especially when we get into the elective areas, that's where there is a lot of staff that is shared. So in a normal school year, there's a lot of thought that has to go into scheduling with our shared staff. And then when you throw some of the challenges that we've had over the past year or so, that makes it a little bit more difficult. But as Dr. Birch mentioned, being a walking district had some benefits this year. I can't imagine some of the schools who had to juggle busing kids to school and the challenges that must have created. So we were very lucky that way with being a walking district. But as any small school, we do have those challenges with sharing staff, which was probably the biggest difference we had in terms of scheduling. At the middle school specifically, in our 6 through 8 building, we do have teaming at the middle school. So one of the things that we did with teaming this year was to create cohorts. So rather than our traditional scheduling of students into their classes, we did try to keep kids together during the school day as much as possible, simply knowing that if there were cases, we didn't want to have to quarantine any more students than absolutely necessary. So that's just one example of many of the things that we considered prior to the school year starting when it came to scheduling. But as I said, those are some things that may make Brentwood unique and maybe a little bit different than some of the larger districts that had other issues that they were facing.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm not sure that I would broadcast that I was a walking district too far. I'm sure there's a lot of jealousy. Very good. Well, thank you. Dr. Cruz can tell us a little bit about Elizabeth Forward.
Good morning, everybody. And Elizabeth Ford, we're a K-12 public school about 45 minutes south of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania here. 42 square miles, so a little different than Brentwood, and we do have busing, so I am jealous of that situation. But we have 4 elementaries, 1 middle school. Our middle school is a teaming concept also, and we have an 8-period day at the middle school, and then our high school is a 9-period day. About 2,400 students in our district. Elizabeth Ford is part of the Digital Promise League of Innovative Schools. There's 114 school districts across the country that are part of the League of Innovative Schools. We've had iPads K-12 1-to-1 since 2011, so almost 10 years now that we've had iPads for every student, kindergarten through 12th grade. And we've had a couple different learning management systems. So when we had to shut our schools down on March 13th last year, our students, we missed one day, basically that Monday, and we just pushed forward. Elizabeth Ford was part of PD's pilot program for flexible instructional days when snow was happening. So we've actually had days where we had remote days before COVID to understand what that would look like. So that really helped us when we had to shut our school down for the global pandemic. So we actually last year met 180 days, student days. And at the end of the year, we had 2 extra days with our teachers that we created flex days over the summertime for professional development. So that worked out really well. We currently use our learning management system, Canvas, but we've used before that even eBackpack, a learning management system. So some of the technology pieces were really in place before the global pandemic. One of the frameworks that we use at Elizabeth Ford is something called Modern Teacher Framework, and it's a digital convergence. And it's really helped us with our digital ecosystem, our modern curriculum, how to lead in this digital world. And so we did a lot of that work before COVID, before we had to shut our schools down on March 13th. So it really helped us propel us to be successful.
Very good. Thank you. And from Freedom, I see Mr. Deal has been able to join us. So Mr. Deal, Mr. Smith, tell us a little bit about Freedom and what some of the local conditions there were that impacted scheduling and instructional decisions.
Go ahead, Ryan. I'll let you go first.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah. So thank you. Good morning, everyone. So we are a smaller school, but the nice thing about our district is all 3 schools, elementary, middle school, and high school, are all on the same campus. So that definitely provides some advantages with any given situation, especially the pandemic. We are a school that relies on busing. So that was one of the challenges that we did face with our K-4 being on a different schedule than our 5 through 12. Not that it's a unique situation, but I do believe one of our biggest challenges that has been expressed over the last 12 to 13 months is with our shared staff members. We had to work as an administrative group and a staff with the staff members to make sure that when we did do modifications to the schedule to accommodate all students, we were all on the same page. So in fact, that we weren't overlapping schedules or had time that our staff didn't have expectations or responsibilities. And, one of the things about Freedom being a smaller school and a smaller admin team, we clearly wear many hats, but we collaborate quite well with one another. So I'll let Mr. Deal take from there as far as maybe touch up on a little bit of the technology that we utilized over the 13 months.
Sounds good. Thanks, Ryan. As you know, I'm Bill Deal. I'm the high school principal here at Freedom. One of the things that kind of makes the high school unique, I think, out of our group and certainly here in the Freedom District is the high school runs on a block schedule. So we have four 80-minute classes every day, and then they're on an alternating AB day schedule. So students will have those classes every other day. One of the things that allowed for, that we've had for quite a few years, but it ended up being a little bit useful in the pandemic, is we have about 30 minutes at the end of the day for what we call personalized learning time. So for those of you that have been around a while, we absolutely stole that from Montour. That's a half-hour block at the end of the day. Our students, when all things are normal, that's when our clubs meet, class officers can meet, students have an opportunity for remediation during that time. But we were able to pack some things in there to make it useful throughout the pandemic. As Ryan alluded to, the technology that we used, we are one-to-one now district-wide with Chromebooks. So the high school has been one-to-one probably in excess of a decade now. The middle school was well on its way to being one-to-one, and there was a plan for the elementary to be one-to-one as well. The pandemic just made us accelerate those plans a little bit. So we were pretty well poised to kind of jump right in when the pandemic went, but just accelerated those elementary plans a little bit. The teachers have been using the Google platform, primarily Google Classroom, as kind of the online or virtual hybrid model piece. So the high school had been doing that for a number of years. So we ended up kind of using high school staff to in-service some of the staff in the lower grades just to kind of get everybody on board with that.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Smith. Mr. Deal, I should mention that until I transitioned to my current role at the department a couple of weeks ago, I worked with these gentlemen as their superintendent. So I know a little bit about what they've been experiencing as well. From Northgate, Dr. Caton.
Sure. So at Northgate School District, we are a very small school district of just over 1,000 students. We border the city of Pittsburgh to the north. And I'll just talk about one thing that we ran into that really affected scheduling for us. And that was that when we decided to work on a partial return, we found that a full third of our students were going to elect to remain online for the remainder of the year. And so we wanted to be very thoughtful about staying connected with that number of students and making sure that they were remaining in contact with their teachers and making sure that they were connected with their coursework. And so at the elementary level, we revamped our schedule. We brought on a couple of extra teachers, and we worked so that all of our online students had fully online courses with live instructors every single day, all day long. We found that asynchronous learning for those students wasn't the best option. And so that was the biggest change of scheduling for us. And that was just making sure that those students who were remaining online had an opportunity to work live with a teacher every single day, and really maintained that connection that they get in a small school.
Very good. Thank you. And from West Allegheny, Dr. Lippert.
Good morning, everybody. West Allegheny is a little bit west of Pittsburgh. We wrap around the Pittsburgh International Airport. We're a district of about 60 square miles. We do run a two-tier busing system because we are fortunate to have the middle school on the same campus of the high school. We educate about 3,300 students. We're a little bit unique because we did run a 5-day in-person model for the entire pandemic and did not close. I had 2 minor closure for 2 days at one of our elementaries and a 2-day closure up at the high school. We run 4 educational delivery models. So the predominant is, of course, the 5-day in person. And we averaged about 83% of our students that came every day in person. We also run 2 different online models. So like Northgate, we run a fully synchronous model, K through 8, which I'll get into that a little bit with the staffing and the scheduling. And then we also have and have had for years a fully asynchronous online platform as well. And then the 4th educational delivery model, because we had a synchronous model K-8, we also have a hybrid model at the high school. And basically what that means is that we have a pretty intensive early college and high school program here. And I have about 27 staff members that are adjunct CCAC faculty members and are able to, while they teach high school courses, award college credit. So the only way that kids could continue to get college credit was to come in person. So for college bearing courses, kids would be able to come in for a certain portion of their schedule, but then transition to the fully online asynchronous. So we actually ran 4 educational delivery models here. Probably the key thing when you're offering that many models and kind of juggling the models, when our parents chose which educational delivery model, which ran during the month of July, about 20% of our student population chose to remain at home. So when students moved home, the staffing moved home. So in other words, what we did is when you normally run maybe 4 rounds at a elementary, it went to 3 rounds, and we did some creative staffing where the CDC put out the guidelines of which staff members were most at risk, 65 and plus, those that are immunocompromised. We looked for staff members where we could protect their health and safety, put them in the online synchronous platform, and then did some, creative scheduling with the teachers that remained. So that's how we were able to do and run, 4 different models in the district. But our predominant model is 5 days in person, and we started on August 25th, and I think we have 30 days left, believe it or not, as of tomorrow.
That's amazing how, as my wife likes to say regarding our children, the days are long, but the years are short.
Right.
And that really has been the case over the course of especially the last 2 school years. It's amazing that we are already in the last third of the month of April for this school year.
I did want to say, because unlike Todd and I think it might have been Freedom that also said this, we weren't a fully 1-to-1. We didn't allow students to take home devices. I mean, I called it a 1.1.5, a 1 to a 1.5. I mean, we had a lot of technology, but a little bit over a year ago, I mean, we really scaled pretty significant reform, including a new Canvas learning system, the entire district, as well as a full 1-to-1 to position our families, to be able to navigate this pandemic.
Yeah, it's
they're doing well. They're doing well.
Quite a transition that we've all been through. All of the panelists and all the participants that have worked over the last year. So on the screen there are the questions that are going to kind of be the guiding questions for our conversation here today. We've talked a little bit about the local conditions, and some of the things that you said kind of piqued my interest that I'll probe on a little bit. What are the things that you tried that worked? What are the things that didn't work so well? How did you take into account all of those factors that the CDC and the Department of Health were talking about in terms of social distancing and limited student counts and cafeteria service, and for everybody but Brentwood, transportation, all of those things that impacted us. And importantly, how did you gather input from and how did you share information with your community as you were making these decisions and moving down the path? And then when we get to the end, we'll take a minute and see what advice you have for school leaders. But as the panelists were talking a little bit about their schools. A couple of folks talked about the number of students that returned versus the number that stayed virtual, and synchronous and asynchronous options for students. But let's start before that with districts that had existing cyber options, so existing asynchronous or even possibly synchronous cyber options for their kids. And what did that look like before the pandemic, and how did you transition that through? And as I said earlier, I really would hope that this can be sort of conversational. If there's anybody that wants to jump in, please do so. Jerry, you talked a little bit about that, and Todd, you talked a little bit about that as well, I believe.
I'll say just so we had, I believe since 2012, it was before I was here, I came to West Allegheny in the 2014-15 school year. So we had a fully, and this was, this was to combat the charter school movement, right? That the district started their own virtual online academy. We call it Waiver, West Allegheny Virtual Academy. When we transitioned to the pandemic, we wanted students, and we had very little elementary students or middle school students. It was really the students that took advantage of that were more high school. But what we had to do in order to scale this, basically we had to move forward with an adoption of a more robust asynchronous curriculum in the K-5. We had to add a lot more than one software provider for the instructional technology so that we had comparable program of studies for in-person and program of studies for students that were on the fully asynchronous virtual platform. So the other thing that we had to do is, because of the number of students that were in there, we do pay our teachers extra money to be able to tutor, to be able to monitor, even though they're not technically the teacher. We did do a much more robust compensation package, including basically treating it. I don't know what your contracts are like, but most of our teachers teach either 6 or 7 periods per day, 5 to 7. We treated it as if they were teaching an extra period in person. And the compensation was, the money was significant because of the licensing. So there was a lot of money that went to support our fully asynchronous model, more so than the SOLA model. The SOLA model is just a synchronous online academy, these acronyms, but we're paying the teachers whether they're in the classroom or whether they're at home teaching. So that model wasn't as expensive as the fully asynchronous. Asynchronous models can be expensive depending on the number of students you put in there.
Sure.
That's what we found.
Absolutely. Any other panelists want to jump in on that?
Same with Jerry. And, hats off to Jerry too for 5 days a week since August. Her team and what she's done, it's incredible. And, we started with a hybrid model at Elizabeth Ford, and then we transitioned to 5 days a week with our elementary students at the beginning of November, and been 5 days a week at our elementary, and then hybrid again in middle school, high school, and then now 4 days a week at the middle school, high school since basically December. So it's worked out very well. And we've had it shut down a couple times. But to Jerry's point too, is the asynchronous cyber programs. We've offered a cyber program at Elizabeth Ford probably for 10 years now, asynchronous, using basically a canned curriculum, and paying our teachers to monitor those kids that are on there. Majority were high school, maybe a handful of middle school, and pretty much zero at the elementary level. But we've always had this deep conversation about how to use a learning management system to offer your remote learners, and how do we get rid of this canned curriculum that is expensive, like Jerry was saying. So we've continued to have those discussions even for next school year of, as teachers building out their content and videos on a learning management system, how to use that content and drive your cyber program. Our goal is to have synchronous learning though. When the pandemic happened, our goal was to be able to offer that synchronous learning K-12. And one thing that we did that I think that we would continue to do is we designated almost 12 teachers for remote learning at K-5. So we looked at our sections of how many kids were going to be in person and how many parents wanted their kids to be remote. And we just transitioned some of our teachers into that remote. And that's their full job all day, was connecting synchronously with our K-5 students. So that worked out very well. And it's something I know we will continue if we have to. The big question is, what is next school year going to look like? And I think all of us are struggling with that. And I think there's some models out there that schools, a kindergarten teacher was responsible for in-person learning and also those kids that were remote. And that wasn't what we wanted. We wanted to have that because we didn't want to lose kids to outside cyber charter school. We wanted to make sure we keep them here. And also we wanted to make sure the curriculum, everybody's talking about learning loss, but we wanted to make sure our curriculum for the kids who were remote is the same curriculum they were getting in person too. So when they decided to come back to regular school, it would be a seamless transition with especially content in our curriculum. So.
Thank you. Anyone else want to share?
I'll just give you the opposite perspective. So we had seen some of our students leaving for charter cyber school, but when the pandemic hit, one of the first stats that I shared is we had a decrease of students of almost 161, and that's because we weren't offering our own program. So we had hummed and hawed around creating our own cyber program somehow, some way, but that sense of urgency was created by the pandemic, and that accelerated conversations with our union. And one of the best things that came out of this whole pandemic is the relationship that we have now built with our union, because our teachers have been absolutely instrumental in getting us to where we need to be. So our focus right now is getting those students back that left and keeping them here, because we have to fully acknowledge now that families have a choice. And we want them to be in the public school. We believe that's where they learn best. But we have to make sure that we're going to provide an option for them that's appealing. So that was just a wake-up call for us.
So two questions for the panelists. Number one, do you get the sense that this model of instruction with some students being virtual, the majority of your students being in person, is I hate to use the term new normal, is the model of instruction that we're kind of going to be seeing probably moving into the future, regardless of pandemic?
So we had begun putting together an asynchronous academy for our students just about 8 months before the pandemic happened. So we were positioned in a place that was very fortunate, but we expected to have just a handful of students in there. And then, of course, when the pandemic happened, it quadrupled our expected numbers. Now, this year coming up, we've begun scheduling, and our small numbers that we projected before are going to be much, much larger than we ever expected. And so I think that there are a number of students who never would have selected an asynchronous online option before. And now, having tried it out, it does work for some of our students. And that's something that now they're going to expect. And so for us anyway, we have a number of students that probably never would have gone there that are now going to be a part of that. And that will be the schooling that they select from here on out.
To kind of build on what Chris said, one of the things that I found interesting in our district is we've kind of spanned from starting with a hybrid model, actually having to close for about a month and go fully online, and now we're back 4 days a week. But I think that, going back to Jerry, Todd, and Chris and what they all mentioned, is the number of options that kids and families have seen has really been interesting to kind of follow, because we had a large push in our district of parents who wanted their kids who were remote to be synchronous. That was one of the things. We were not a one-to-one district at the beginning of the year. As some of you had mentioned before, that's definitely sped up the process. So we did become one-to-one right after Thanksgiving, but our families were definitely in favor of being synchronous. However, what we found interesting is when we did go synchronous and we shared that with our families in a webinar, we did have a lot of families reach out to us and say they preferred the asynchronous model. Some of our high school kids had taken jobs and we're helping families with finances and things like that. So I find it really interesting that you have a large number of people, probably as we all share together, who definitely want the kids in person and in school and back to the old normal, I guess we could say. But we also have that movement towards the online, both the synchronous online and the asynchronous, because I think depending on your family situation, maybe one model works better than another. And the challenge that's created, I think, for all of us is trying to provide so many different things for so many different families and really trying to meet all their needs, with the same some of the same resources you've had in the past, but trying to meet a lot of different needs with those resources.
Yeah, we did some, preliminary commitment for our online families. We're seeing now, keep in mind, we have 83% in person, and throughout the year, we allowed a transfer process. Most of our transfers went from online into in person because they were sort of seeing, okay, how's West A going to do this? Are they closing schools all the time? And when they started to see that we were able to maintain being open, not quarantining, large groups of kids, classrooms, so on and so forth, we had a lot of parents transition back in as the year progressed. What we saw when we put out, and we just did this right before spring break, we have a 92% return rate back into in-person already coming from our online. So the only model, and remember there's 4 models, our parents knew that the solo, which is the synchronous model, was only going to hold for a year, because when students come back, we need the teachers to follow them. But the only model that's consistent right now is that hybrid model at the high school, right? So that they come in person for some of the time, and then they can leave campus and go home and do some of their classes. Normally, when we ran a hybrid, prior to the pandemic, kids would complete their online courses, as part of their schedule. They would go to a room and they would, do their online course. But when they have, 3 or more classes, we allow them to, modify AM, PM, whatever works for them. So I don't know if it's going to hold true for, other school districts, but our return rate is, it's pretty high. And we'll set the table.
I would agree, Doc.
Yeah, we'll set the table.
Go ahead, sorry.
We set the table at West A to educate every single student all year long, same way that we're doing it the upcoming school year, with every student coming back in person. And we know that's not going to happen. So then worst case scenario, everybody's back here. We still have enough space to, to accommodate everybody.
Very good. Mr. Deal.
So, Dr. Fuller, like what you were saying about, almost have we opened Pandora's box by giving all of these options, and how do we address that in the future? So Freedom being a pretty small school, I think we all feel like we're pretty slim on our staffing. We had originally looked at doing a collaboration across the county and through the IU, in very much like the traditional cyber model. And what we found is that parents that were looking for a cyber model, as soon as you said, well, they may not be all Freedom teachers, well, then they really backed off wanting that model. So as we look at what we're going to do in the future, we've had that cyber plan for a good while, very similar to what Todd was talking about. It's kind of a canned curriculum, but now we're thinking, how can we build in the lessons learned from the pandemic and what we're going to offer in the future? So as long as we didn't have kids in the building, students could choose either to join virtually synchronously or virtually asynchronously. So teachers were recording their lesson, they'd post that to Google Classroom. So if a student couldn't join synchronously, there were recordings and everything available for them to go in and do that asynchronously. Once we had students back in the building in either a hybrid or, like right now, we're full back in, but we have some students who are choosing to remain virtual, those students have to be joining synchronously. So as soon as we had kids in the building, the asynchronous option went away. So what we're trying to figure out here is, since our families that are looking for those options seem to prefer Freedom teachers, they seem to, they may need an asynchronous option. Is there something we can do to kind of make that an easier lift for our faculty? Because, trying to record lessons while you're teaching the students in classes, that's difficult for our staff, but that's what we're seeing kind of as the future of our quote unquote cyber program, rather than continuing with kind of the canned curriculum through Edumentum or wherever it's from.
Mm-hmm.
And I like to add something that, we're putting these options in because of COVID-19. And, post COVID-19, what are things that we're doing, is offering this remote piece. Is it something we should be doing? You asked about the future of education, and, the question would be down the road post COVID would be, are kids being successful in this remote setting? And do we keep it? And there's kids in a remote setting that are not doing well, but because of COVID, they've decided to stay out of school. So how do you put criteria in place to make sure that if they're not doing well in remote, we put interventions in place, but then how do we get them back into in person? Maybe just, remote's not for them. I was a high school principal. I know there's a couple of people on the call that were high school principals. We've been talking about high school reform for 25, 30 years. And, I think K-8, in my opinion, traditional is the way we have it. But I think, it's a great opportunity to post COVID to really revamp what we think of high school and kids coming in and with hybrid models and remote learning. So my thoughts.
Todd, you make a great point because, we've been doing the progress monitoring the same way as we do with our in-person kids in both of our online platforms. And the online kids that are either face-to-face with a teacher every day following the same bell schedule, or they're asynchronous, their results still are not as strong. And that's on, all of your leading indicators. Plus, then we're dealing with transition for kids who have been out of school for almost a year and a half by the time we get to next August, where they have significant social and emotional issues that we're gearing up for now to try to get them back. So I'm a fan that, teachers matter most. And if we're going to educate kids, they need to be connected to a teacher. It works for some kids, but the majority of the kids, we're seeing data lags in everything from engagement to, the benchmarks for reading. We'll see what PSSAs hold, but I'm with you, Todd. Like at the end of the day, we'll keep a model, but I'll turn to any parent and say, we're not going to keep a model if your kid's not learning. And we actually have been aggressive. I don't know if any of you have done this, but if we see students lagging, we've said you have to come back. We've transferred them in, and we give them like a period of, okay, you have 2 weeks to, pull up and be more engaged. If they're not, we're saying, sorry, your educational model, decision was contingent upon your child, being successful, and we move kids back in. So I'm with you, Todd, on the academic piece matters an awful lot, how they actually perform.
Good for you for taking a stand on that. What has been the response from parents on that?
We haven't had one refuse. We've had to do a lot of personalized, tours in the school multiple times
Sure.
to get the anxiety. But as soon as their child comes back, because they think like it's going to be overwhelming, they have to stay in a classroom all day, and all these rules of which hall to walk down and wearing a mask. But honestly, kids adjust. We all know this. Kids are the ones that adjust faster than oftentimes the parents do. So we've had a lot of success, but that also comes with just, I think we all know this. When you have stability in leadership, and there are principals in buildings that have been there for a while, that have relationships with families, you have just a stronger kind of trust factor with your community.
Absolutely.
And we really, really leverage that. And that's just been a huge benefit for us in working with families.
Very good. I think that's a key point. Let's go down a slightly different path. And as I say this, I'm going to say, for those of you that are joining us, if you have questions, please use the Q&A. We've had a couple, and that's kind of where we're going next. We've had some conversation about synchronous versus asynchronous, and one of the questions that came up is, for your asynchronous kids, what does your curriculum look like? What does your instruction look like? Is it, as Mr. Deal mentioned, recordings, teachers recording their session during the day so that students can access them later? Is it more of a canned curriculum that is that your students can access outside of your normal instruction? What does that asynchronous piece look like for those of you on the panel?
I'll go. Currently, we use our learning management system as Canvas. So our teachers have done just an incredible job. They record themselves. They invite the students in if they want to watch it live, and then they upload their video to our Canvas page, so kids can watch that at a later time. So that's worked out really well. But again, we wanted to make sure we were using our curriculum and not purchase some canned curriculum that they're working through. So really the majority of our kids, probably 90% of our 99% of our kids are using Canvas, just like students in person that are working asynchronous.
Our asynchronous model is very similar. We also use Canvas. Several of the local districts in this area had all gone in together to get Canvas, and it was a huge help for us because it was really much more of a learning platform than what we had used previously. So that's been a huge help. But the asynchronous model is very similar to what Todd had said with teachers doing video lessons and those types of things. The one thing we did, as I said, we were not a one-to-one district when the year started. So our big concern with the asynchronous model was as several people had mentioned, the interaction with the teachers. So we actually, before the school year started, we actually adjusted our schedule and shortened the length of the day so the teachers would have time at the beginning of the day and at the end of the day to have those individual conversations with students. So it might be, a Teams meeting that they had or a small group instruction that they were doing, because we wanted to be very mindful of those students who at the beginning of the year were in that asynchronous model to make sure that they still had connections with teachers. So we actually had to shorten the day a little bit and provide time at the beginning of and the end of the day for those teachers to work specifically with those remote students who were asynchronous.
And if I could build off of what Dave was saying and what Todd was saying. So the South Hill superintendents became very close starting March 13th and last year and moving forward and saying, listen, we know that our students can be quite transient from district to district. And that's where the whole, let's get together and create one student management system. So if our kids leave here and go to EF, they're going to find a similar platform. So they're not starting all over again. But take that to the next step for next year. So we're all talking about, what model are we going to have in place? What instructional model? And the conversation that we're having now, and I hope one that continues, is this an opportunity for school districts to work together as a consortium and say, in Brentwood, I have one biology teacher. And if I have a handful of students that want to be synchronous or asynchronous in a cyber program, I don't have the ability to pull that one biology teacher and have them teach that class. But if I can get together with Todd or, with Jerry or someone, and it doesn't even have to be geographically close, if we can come together as a consortium and problem solve through this, is that an opportunity for our students that we wouldn't have been able to offer before? So that's just one of the, silver linings that we're looking at as to how can we learn from this experience.
One of the things that we did for our asynchronous students, because we still wanted them to have some sort of connection, is that with all of our teachers who supervise an asynchronous course, we built a period into their day for office hours. And those teachers open up a Google Meet during that office hour time. So rather than scheduling, which we found out to be ineffective because kids weren't reaching out to schedule the needed office hours, the teacher just goes in and opens up the Google Meet, and it is like an open door office. So whenever students need to touch base, they know when that time period is that teacher is there in that open Google Meet. And those asynchronous students have an opportunity to come and have a conversation, get a mini lesson, and get support with their work.
And if I could piggyback off that at Freedom, and I believe we did this K to 12, at times different days, but we try to remain consistent with a Wednesday model. Sometimes that conflicted with Mr. Deal's AB or red-white schedule, but we did our best to utilize Wednesdays as Chris stated, kind of those open office times, so all students had ability and access to the teachers, in a one-on-one setting, small group, and we found there was significant benefit that came from that. We piloted that for 1 or 2 sessions throughout the first couple of weeks, and due to the benefits and the success that we experienced, we ran that through the remaining hybrid model, even when we were on a Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday traditional hybrid. We ran that all the way up to the point until we came back 5 days a week all in.
So one of the questions that's come up from a couple of participants, especially as it relates to the hybrid and the online teaching, is the impact that your teachers associations and union agreements had played on your decision-making process. Talk a little bit about that, and that's probably going to have to focus primarily on the superintendents and central office folks. How did those union-related issues impact your decision-making, and how did you work through those? Did you establish MOUs, or what did that look like?
At West Day, we eventually kind of, codified it by writing an agreement, not an MOU, but just an agreement for the pandemic year. And it was addressing things such as, right of return. When we did the model's a little bit different because we don't sprinkle in, asynchronous days where everybody's doing it. So the teachers that are out doing our fully online synchronous academy, the union appreciated the approach that instead of putting it out and interviewing, we look for the win-wins, because we do have staff that have, legitimate medical issues that have been documented, or children at home that were significantly at risk. So the union supported, that sort of staff matching in places where we didn't have a position and we didn't have someone who was medically fragile. Then we went through, and it wasn't as easy as, well, let's just open this up, because if you have, 3 elementary schools or 4 elementary schools, you have one staff member that the round went from 4 rounds to 3 rounds. Well, that's the person you got to move. You can't move staffing across all of your schools. So it was really just kind of a staffing matrix that we did. But our union was more concerned just about right of return. Clearly, the team that's teaching the online fully synchronous, they follow the exact same curriculum, the same assessments. They just have to teach in an online world. The schedule follows the same. The teacher workday is the same. And we knew that if we didn't do that, then we would have issues. And asynchronous runs completely different because it's fully asynchronous all year long. And we buy programs, and there's multiple programs that fuel that, because you're offering world language and AP courses. And I mean, it's just all over the place. How many programs that we, companies that we contract with. But for us, it was trying to be proactive in not creating union issues by having the parallelism with the workday, the right of return, having teachers online have a prep period, making sure that we weren't treating them differently than our staff in person. But I'll tell you, it was a significant learning curve. I mean, to go from teaching, some of these folks I have a 65-year-old that was a kindergarten teacher her entire career in person, had to learn a fully online, like, how do you teach online? Kindergartners, mind you. I mean, this isn't like as easy as maybe 8th graders that just turn off their screens. So, I mean, the learning curve was these educators are just amazing. I mean, what they were able to do in a year with basically no ramp up. I mean, really.
And to add that to Jerry, I agree. Like, hats off to you guys that, implemented one-to-one, implemented learning management. It's taken us 9 years to get to this point, and you guys are flipping a switch in some
Well, that's
cases.
because you blazed the trail. See, that's why we didn't go out first. We learned from people who did it.
Yeah.
We knew what not to do because we paid attention. So yeah, it was helpful kind of lagging on that one.
But, and I'll answer that question in a second, Jeff, but, the future of education, you talked about too. And, what does a learning management system look like post-COVID? What is, are we just putting a bunch of resources and PowerPoints and videos on a learning management system? How do we make it more engaging to kids? Like, I hate to see a learning management system go away after COVID. So, I think we have to have some deep discussion about how to create engaging digital platforms for kids too. But, back to the union question, we've been working, I think all of us in every district, trying to get the union involved in June, July, August as we were planning. I think that was one thing that was very critical. But, I kind of reflect last June when we brought the principals in, and said, hey guys, we're going to do a hybrid model. Half the kids are going to come on Monday and Tuesday. The other half are going to come Thursday, Friday. They're looking at us like, this is never going to work. So, you think about how we revamped education in a matter of a couple months to try to get our kids in person. I think it's just incredible. But, the union had those eyes too of like, this will never work. What are you talking about? Half the kids are going to come, and we'll give you Wednesdays to work on the digital platform side, the learning management system side. So, but all along, we've really kept them in a loop and met with them on a regular basis throughout the whole process. And we did have to put an MOU together regarding live streaming and what that would look like, and just to set everybody at ease.
Very good. So let's go a completely different direction. And Dr. Lippert mentioned this about learning from Dr. Karuskin and the things that they did, and things that worked and things that didn't work. What are some things that you tried in your schools? Maybe back March 16th and 17th of last year, and going through the end of last year. Some things that you tried at the beginning of this school year that just absolutely didn't work, and you had to pull back and punt on those. What are some of those things? Anybody have any that they're willing to share?
I would just say that overall asynchronous learning was not something that was successful for the majority of our students. As much live instruction that we could do, the better. We thought we were going to be able to filter in some asynchronous here to provide some additional things there. And we really found that expecting that asynchronous to get done and be worthwhile was nearly a waste of time. And so we very quickly backed up on all of that and put up almost all of our eggs in the live learning basket and really headed that direction.
I concur with Chris 100%. There were a very few number of students that really wanted and were successful in asynchronous. Now, there are a couple out there, and that's something we have to keep in mind moving forward. But, our parents were very vocal. And I know Dave's going to laugh, I held live webinars with parents on a monthly basis, and they were allowed to ask me anything they wanted. And then I told the principals they had to do it too. And they're like, you are crazy. Do you know what kind of questions you're going to get? And we got them. But that was how we were able to really determine what was and was not working. They were not shy about telling us how frustrated they were, or, how their child wasn't motivated, and truly got a glimpse into the day of a teacher. And that's where we had to go back, because we did not plan to go synchronous. Our teachers were adamant. They were just learning Canvas. We were just one-to-one. I mean, you talk about it, the odds were stacked against us. And those union meetings with the union executive board was absolutely crucial. They were on the webinars too, and they heard, and they said, okay, as much as we are afraid to do this, we're willing to do this with some guidance. And so those parent webinars were crucial to let us know what we needed to change and move forward. So, as tough as they are that night at 10 o'clock when you're still on with parents, it was the right thing to do.
I had to laugh when Dr. Birch brought that up, because when I saw the list of questions we were going to discuss, it said what did work and what didn't work. And my answer was webinars, live webinars. So it answered both, but they were difficult at times. There were times parents wanted to talk about very individual things about their children, which obviously wasn't what a webinar was for. But on the other hand, even though sometimes, you get information you don't necessarily want, at least where people are coming from. And I think it really helped us to make what ended up being the best decision. So the live webinars are something that probably a lot of people hadn't done in the past, but we learned a lot from them, and they were difficult at times. But I truly think regardless of people sharing things that they were upset about, I think they truly did appreciate that we were listening to them and trying to be empathetic to where they were coming from, because a lot of us have children and we're dealing with the same thing at home. So I do think the families in our district really appreciated the fact that we were willing to put ourselves out there and take information in, whether it was positive or negative.
So I'm going to try to answer a question in the chat while I answer this question. So it's sort of like what worked, and because it worked, what didn't work. So the way that we were able to basically run school without disruption is we focused on getting 6 feet in the district. So that sort of concept reconceptualizes how you configure your schools, right? And how teachers move within a school. So basically, we have enough square footage in all of our schools to put, most likely, unless you're overcrowded, every single kid in there at 6 feet. Like, we knew we had enough square footage. It's how you use the square footage. So we were very creative with turning art rooms, music rooms, chorus rooms, libraries, you name it. We didn't have to take the gymnasiums, by the way, but that was going to be where we went next. But every single possible space was looked at to see if we could get the 6 feet. Plus, we stripped everything out of every classroom other than the kid's desk and the teacher's desk. So with that, we did create, so this goes into the chat question, how did we manage, the rolling 14 and social distancing? You do not have to quarantine if kids are, greater than 6 feet, right? So we did not quarantine classrooms of kids we didn't have to. And we've processed well over 200 cases live here and had the data to prove we had not had one classroom spread. So I can tell you, when you plan to put kids back, for us, the key is 6 feet of social distancing, keep them in mass, and practice disinfecting desks, in case they do transition between classes. This is like a real life case study over here. It works. So with the rolling 14 days, basically, we also, because we have our own health system, right? Like, we have Allegheny County Health Department, and those PDE regs, there's asterisks that, well, you take direction if you're a county that has your own health department. And we're very fortunate in Allegheny County that we have a director and a deputy director that believes kids should be in person and that they learn best in person. So they knew our model. We have 3 people, including myself. I'm one of the 3 that are knee deep. Every time we have a case, I'm involved in doing the contact tracing, the case management, so on and so forth. So it was that partnership with the Allegheny County Health Department that allowed us to manage cases, clean behind the case. We have data to prove that, we don't have spread in our classrooms. And that's how we were able to handle the rolling 14 days, because remember, PDE put those out as arbitrary. All the superintendents said it. These are arbitrary numbers. Like, who were they talking to? Did they talk to districts that had kids in 5 days, or that ran a hybrid model that had 6 feet versus 4 feet versus 3 feet? So the other creative thing that we did is we started to deep clean our schools over the weekend. We would just, if the high school was getting close to the magic 11, that was the magic number 11, then we would just proactively deep clean the entire high school. And then we would start the rolling 14-day period over. So what didn't work in that, because that's kind of what worked, but what didn't work, when you look at creating spaces, using removable partitions don't work. I'll tell you that right now. You need to create semi-permanent walls, something floor to ceiling, because when we split libraries and we made, partitions in cafeterias and converted cafeterias, the sound that would travel and, it's the noise, because most of those areas don't have like noise canceling panels. So if you're going to do it, we're going back over the summer and putting semi-permanent walls in from floor to ceiling because we're making spaces permanent. I will tell you one other thing that worked. Lockers are a nightmare in middle school. Okay, they're just a nightmare. I don't know why we have them. We took out locker bays and converted locker bays to classrooms. I mean, that's another way that we created space. So that's just some tips that I can tell you when you're in those weeds of trying to figure out, yeah, you can make a classroom, but how conducive is it to actually, to actual instruction without disruption? We quickly pulled off of the temporary partitions and started to do temporary permanent walls.
So how did you staff those places when you took a class and spread it out over 2 instructional spaces? How did you staff that?
Thanks for asking that, Jeff. So this is what I call a pandemic positive. So the way we normally schedule schools is teachers own classrooms. No teachers in our district own a classroom. They're all in pods. Okay, what you're doing is forcing people. They're all 6 feet in their pod, by the way, or more than 6 feet. But in the smaller classrooms where you can't use it because you can't put 20 or 30 kids in there at 6 feet, they became what we call the pandemic teaching pods. And all the teachers do their common plan in there. Well, that created an unexpected positive because you're forcing collaboration. They actually collaborate more now than they do when they're in their isolated classrooms. But teachers, basically, it's a college model, right? Like college professors have an office, but they don't own a classroom. So everybody moves around. In the middle and the high school, they move around all the time. And I didn't get any, I thought I would get pushback. We're a very healthy district here because they all get more than 10,000 steps a day. But they have little carts and they decorate their carts and they move around. And I can tell you that K through 7, we have cohorted. They don't move. The kids 8 and up move. Next year we'll have 7 and up move because we trained the 6th graders this year. But the staff at the high school, I mean, you can't find anybody because they're not in the rooms that you're used to. They're just constantly moving around. We have a room matrix. So where the big classes are, as long as you have, you look at your master schedule and, you're running your course demands and tallies, you have to have enough space and prioritize that space for your classes of 30. And then everything else kind of drops in based on, and teachers move. And that hasn't really been a problem for us. But that's a new concept. It's not how we envision schools. Unless you've been in a district, which I was in Pittsburgh, and you had, schools that had dropping enrollment and ones that were completely overcrowded. Districts that have to deal with overcrowding are used to art on a cart, music on a cart. They're used to teachers sharing. Our building utilization is horrible because most teachers teach 5 periods, right? And you run 9-period days. There's 4 periods where rooms aren't utilized. So when you start looking at room utilization and you take your biggest classrooms, you'd be surprised how many, if you do that type of matrix, how much you can actually get the 6 feet when you start to look at room utilization across a 9 or 10 period day.
Very good. Thank you. I want to go to the whole idea of communicating with staff and community that the folks from Brentwood touched on. But before we do that, I just want to loop back through. Does anybody else have things that they tried that didn't work that you think would be a good warning to share with our participants to say, hey, we tried this, don't do it?
If I would ask our administrators or even our teachers, our goal was to get kids into our school, but hybrid model is something I don't think we'd ever try to get back to anytime soon. I think it's just very difficult when half your kids are coming on 2 days a week and the other half and trying to do some type of synchronous or asynchronous while they're at home on the days. And I just think, our goal was to get the kids back in some type of in-person, but that hybrid model was just it's very cumbersome. And I hope we would never go back to it.
At one point, the teachers had Monday, Tuesday students. They had, Monday, Thursday students. They had Tuesday, Friday students. They had students with special needs who were in 4 days a week. They had students that were fully remote. So I really agree with Todd. I think from the teaching standpoint, and having been in a classroom for over 10 years, I think that became very difficult for teachers to juggle. They wanted to do as much as they could for all the kids. And I think sometimes the more masters you serve, the less well you do it. So the hybrid model, I think, served the purpose. It allowed kids to have in-person time with the teacher. So from that standpoint, it was positive, but I do think it became very difficult for teachers to juggle. And as Todd had mentioned, we noticed with the hybrid model, a lot of the kids, when they were in person, were doing a very nice job, but then, you would create a little bit of steam with them. And then all of a sudden they were back out of the building for a day or two. So I do think that, moving forward, I think that would be something that we would try to avoid if at all possible.
And if I can add to that, definitely communicating to your families and the students about the in and out transitions. That's where we see the most significant struggle. When students go on virtual on Fridays, it's probably a 15 or 20% increase, and our staff really struggles with that. And, that's something that, procedure policy that needs to be put in place as we continue to look at what models districts are going to use in the future. So make sure that's communicated clearly, make sure there's some type of expectations. If you choose to go virtual, you have to commit to that for, 2, 3, 9, or maybe a whole 9 weeks. That's definitely advice that I would provide that we here at our district is struggling with significantly.
So let's then go to that communication piece. And Dr. Birch and Mr. Radcliffe talked a little bit about their webinars and that they used for gathering input from their community. What are the things that you did as a district or as a building principal to gather input from your community, both teachers and parents and students, and to share information with your community?
I'll add a few things to the webinar. So there are a couple mottos that we follow. If you don't tell your story, someone else will. And then the other one is people will fill in the blanks if you don't give them the important information. So when the pandemic first hit, we sent out an update every day. And we archived those updates every day because we wanted parents and the community to know that we're aware of what's going on. And we've never worked through a pandemic before, and neither have they, but we're going to work it out together. So this message of partnership was preached from day one. And then just as with the webinars, the parents said, all right, enough of the daily letters. The information isn't changing fast enough. Back off the daily letters. Now we just need weekly letters. So then we moved to weekly updates. And again, everything was on the website. I think everybody probably created some kind of COVID-19 page. And then once you had an outbreak in your school, you had to, let the community know. So then the parents said, enough, we don't want to see that. So then we transitioned to a chart. And if you go to our website right now, you'll see that we have a chart on the website. It's broken down by school, tells you how many active cases there are currently, students and staff, because you can't drill down any further than that, and then past cases. So you can see where we've been from the beginning. And unlike Jerry, our buildings, 2 of them are 100 years old, and the third one is close to 100 years. So I couldn't even promise 3 feet of physical distancing other than the cafeteria. We have been back at the elementary since February, 4 days a week, and we've done a very good job. The middle high school, we've been back 4 days a week as of the very beginning of April. And again, our cases are not significant, but it was a culmination of all the other mitigation strategies that are in place to keep us there. But, we are still keeping parents informed and updated, but we're not overloading them because everybody has had enough of, information out there. So we've actually pulled back a little bit, and we're only communicating as necessary. Surveys have gone out. I'm sure everybody has done that as well, but it's what you do with that survey information too that's super important. As long as parents know that you're actively using it and then reporting out to them, that really helps them feel better as well. So it was definitely a multi-team approach. Our hierarchy is superintendent and building principals. There's nobody in the middle there. I don't have PR. I don't have HR. I don't have an assistant. None of that is involved. So the team coming together and talking as much as we need to, and then breaking that information out for our families was absolutely critical for us.
We did similar things with Amy, from letters to voice messages to surveys and so forth. And our website has a COVID-19 response. The one approach that we did take over last summer, and I think it was looking back on it, I think it's something we're going to continue to do this summer, is, it was almost like some superintendents out there across the country, across the Commonwealth, it was like a race to get their instructional model out in June, and then guidelines change, and then they put another model out and another model and another model. And we waited really towards the beginning of August, but we let the parents know that the guidelines are continuing to change. Procedures from CDC, from the county health department, are going to continue to change. We don't want to put a model out and then have to change it and get everybody confused. So we really waited about that first week, second week in August to really push out, our plan. And I think we're all, superintendents, I know we're meeting on Monday within our region in Southwestern PA to kind of talk about what next year would look like. But I think we're all a little hesitant of putting something out and not knowing for sure from PDE, from the Allegheny County Health Department, from the PA Health Department, what that could look like for next school year. But that's something I know we don't want to put something out in June and it changes again in July and changes again in August and really confuse people.
Sure.
The only, all of these strategies, I think a lot of us use. The only thing that we did that wasn't mentioned, I created basically an email account. Once we released kind of mid-July, beginning of August, I had a reopening email account. And it will take you 2 weeks. You'll just be in a nightmare because you're answering it's like, if you do it, let me tell you, it's quite the time commitment. But we did the responses, and then I captured the kind of thematically, the themes, and we posted that as an FAQ on our website. So that seemed to be a good strategy to, disseminate information. And the only other thing we did that I'm sure other schools did too is that as we led up to reopening, and again, this is a lot about, relationships and continuity with leadership and kind of the trust that the community has in their building leaders. We hosted by grade band, K2, K5, we hosted parent Zooms. And, we had an extraordinary turn. It's a lot of time commitment. Probably a week was spent just doing Zooms, but it was another opportunity. Like if you didn't want to email your question, you didn't want to read the FAQ, and you just want to jump on and ask us directly or type in a chat. So we sort of hit every avenue of how people like to consume, information. And then, I think most of us in Allegheny County do some type of COVID tracker on our website, and, we provided a ton of health updates, and now we're kind of, people are tired of our health updates. So yeah.
One of the things that we did, and being small certainly allowed us to do this, was really trying to get people to meet with us one-on-one. Dr. Johns did weekly coffee nights where she would meet with people on Zoom meetings, really one-on-one or in very small groups to answer as many questions as she could. I would do the same thing, meeting with single parents or a couple of parents at a time. And we were really proactive, kind of reaching out to, let's face it, the squeaky wheels, to try to really meet with them one-on-one to try to get all of the questions answered, so that those unanswered questions didn't fester and continue. And so taking that time in the evening to meet with individuals and really let them feel like they could ask all of their questions at one time and get them answered was really helpful for us.
Very good. Mr. Deal, Mr. Smith, you guys kind of come at it from the building perspective as opposed to the district perspective. Talk to us about your plan for communicating specific information with parents. Mr. Deal, you had a creative solution to that.
So actually, one of our media teachers here at the high school had created a little video intro well prior to the pandemic, but it was a play on my last name of "What's the Deal?" So I started putting out kind of short videos about, what's the deal with whatever. So, at the end of last year, what's the deal with prom? What's the deal with graduation? What's the deal with, all these things that would have been traditional questions, but then we kind of utilize that a little bit district-wide too, of what's the deal with the different instructional options? What's the deal with reopening schools and some of the rules that we're going to have around reopening? So, while we had the FAQ documents, we had all that out there. What we learned in our community is people just don't read those things, because you end up, answering the same question a half dozen times and you're like, this is printed, this is on the website. So our hope was that the videos would get more people listening. And the nice part is they just had a catchy jingle at the beginning. So like that created some, that created some public talk and got people looking on and watching the video. But that was a good way to disseminate information. So on the what worked side, I thought that side worked very well. I think one of the lessons we learned through communication though is you have to be pretty upfront about what's negotiable and what's not negotiable. Our board really pushed us hard to have a reopening committee of community members that were going to inform our decision of when to reopen schools and how to reopen schools. And I think it was well intentioned in getting feedback from stakeholders, but some of the stakeholders on that committee couldn't understand, well, I told you what I wanted, but you didn't do what I wanted. And it was like, well, yeah, because what you wanted wasn't necessarily what was best for everyone, or what you wanted wasn't necessarily possible given the constraints we had. So it was a really challenging to try to get some of those community members to understand that, because they thought, well, I'm on this committee, I'm going to get to tell the school when to reopen. So just, communication is great. Sometimes it needs to be a little bit more one way, because it needs to be clear what we can negotiate on and what we're able to flex versus what we're not able to do.
Yeah, and I also had something very similar, Mr. Deal. Unfortunately, with the last name of Smith, it's not very catchy, that intro. And obviously at the high school level, he had many more things to communicate, but he also took on any technological needs that families may have to deal with. Mr. Deal kind of ran with that as well. The thing that I did differently was at the beginning of the year, when we came back in a full synchronous asynchronous model. At the time those students were in the building, I did have a live webinar with my family. So I opened up a Zoom or Google Classroom, invited all the families that had, I gave a quick 15-20 minute presentation, and then I left it open for a good 45 minutes to an hour of Q&A. And that was very, very beneficial. I was able to get ahead of a lot of the questions and concerns that I think would have come up if we didn't get to that point. And then I did a follow-up when we decided to bring students back into the building, what we would consider our own hybrid model in October. I also had a live webinar, again, presenting the information and the expectations for students coming back in the building for students and families. And then I also followed up with a Q&A. So very beneficial. Definitely recommend that to other district leaders and other building level leaders, depending on where they are in their own process.
Very good. So for our panelists, just a word of warning. In just a minute, I'm going to go around the table and ask everyone to give their best piece of advice. So be thinking about that. While you're doing that, there's one more question, and it's sort of a big deal question. What about special needs kids, and how did you address them in the virtual setting, and did they need to sign a waiver? Is there someone want to take a stab at that one?
I can say in our district, the special education students did have the opportunity to be back 4 days a week throughout the school year. So we did have, there were questions about ELL students and questions about students with 504 plans. So there were a lot of questions that came up, and the large majority of our special education students did take advantage of coming back 4 days a week from the very beginning of the year, even though we were on the hybrid model. One of the things that I think was very helpful, because a lot of times students have needs that might be, organizational in nature. So we did use a lot of our support staff, paraprofessionals, and so on and so forth, to really reach out to those kids. We were always remote on Wednesdays. So a lot of times on Wednesdays, our paraprofessional staff would reach out to the students, helping them to remain organized, providing any additional support they needed. So we tried to make sure that we had as many supports as possible in place for those students who needed them.
Very good. Thank you. Okay, so we'll go back to the original order of introductions so that you know how to plan for when I'm going to get to you. So we're going to start with Dr. Birch. What's your best word of advice?
My best word of advice is to never use the phrase back to normal, because it doesn't exist to us anymore. We are going to look forward. We're going to, Mr. Radcliffe and Dr. Alexa, who's the high school principal, just did a presentation to the school board talking about silver linings. So we are taking the silver linings from the pandemic and talking about how we can use those to move forward with an amazing opportunity. So we are going to ban that phrase here in Brentwood.
I like that. Mr. Radcliffe. Unfortunately, you're muted.
I guess my first piece of advice is make sure you know when you're muted and when you're not. I go back to, and this has been kind of my, as we call it, the hill to die on since I've started in administration. And we always share with our staff, treat the students as if they're your own. And I know during the pandemic, we've all had to do a lot of things. Dr. Birch always laughs that, we spend a lot of time saying we never thought we'd have to do this in education. But I think, when staff members understand that the work they're putting in is benefiting the kids and what kids need, I think they're more than willing. I think it was Dr. Lippert had mentioned before, just the amazing things that the teachers have done. But, keep the kids at the forefront and understand that, the kids were put in this situation. They didn't choose to be in this situation. So try to make every decision based on what's best for the kids.
Very good. Thank you. Dr. Karuskin.
I think the best advice I could give everybody, as leaders, as educators, is no one's on an island. We have to reach out, and Amy mentioned this, that some of our schools in the southern part of Allegheny County, the superintendents have really bonded more than ever before. Meeting, last summer, every week almost. It's just opened up the communication, I think, more than ever. It's united us as leaders, but even as teachers, the days are just, are over shutting your door and just teaching. I mean, we have to be able to collaborate more and understand some of the pitfalls and really taking things day by day. I think it's overwhelming for us to think about, what August and September is going to bring, and just get through each day, especially during, naturally through this global pandemic. To Dave's point too, I think is important, to keep your eye on kids and trying to, as leaders, give them hope. If it's a prom, if it's a pep rally outside, what can we do that's safe for kids? Because they need that hope. They need things to be looking forward to next month, at the end of the year, and so forth. And the last piece of advice, I know you said one, but is post-COVID. I think that we really need to think about what education can look like and start to plan that now.
Very good. Thank you. Mr. Deal.
I think just kind of reflecting on what Todd said, certainly, open those lines of communication and find out what others are doing, but at the same time, kind of recognize that you can't do it all. So, a solution that works for West A may not work in Freedom because we're very, very different. Along those lines, my best piece of advice would be find what your strengths are and then play to those strengths. For us here at Freedom, especially here at the high school, we're very much focused on personalization. We're a small school. We know our kids, we know our families. So as I think back over the pandemic, my assistant principal and I, we were visiting kids at home every week to say like, hey, you haven't logged on. We're concerned about you. What's going on? That wouldn't work for everybody just because of, other barriers. But for us, that was a strength that we were able to do that. So that's really kind of what we capitalized on. So my advice would be, know what others are doing, but find your own strength, and that's the direction you want to lead.
Very good. Mr. Smith.
Of course, I'm going to go with the relationship piece. David talked about making sure that our teachers understand where our students are, how they're feeling, and the supports that they need. As building and district level leaders, we need to understand what our staff needs, the supports that we need to put in place for them. We need to listen to them. We need to be there for them. That's by far the biggest challenge. All the focus through the entire pandemic, 13, 14 months, has been student, 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 and we get it. And that's where we need to be. But we will not forget about our staff through these times. And just listen to them, let them be a part of the process. Because when that occurs, they feel supported and there's natural buy-in there. So.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Dr. Caton. You're muted.
I'm sorry. Yeah. So we just shouldn't miss the opportunity that this has created to really enact change. Change often happens very slow, and we've all been rocketed forward in some way or another. And I think it's important to latch on to those things that have gone really well. So many of us have moved to one-to-one. So many of us have seen teachers grow in their practice. So many of us have found new ways to communicate with students and ways to create school that is outside of the normal parameters of time and space. And all of those are chances to really revolutionize what we do. And so although it's been difficult, I think there's a lot to hold on to.
Very good. And last but certainly not least, Dr. Lippert.
It's hard to go last because a lot of my colleagues said, I mean, really great recommendations. I have to go. What I was thinking was basically where Ryan was. I just have a belief that if you take care of your staff are going to take care of your students. And, you know, we obviously asked the West Allegheny staff, both, you know, support union as well as our teacher union, to go in areas where a lot of other districts didn't go. And I just think that, you know, in order to support the staff in doing that, any place that we could incentivize them, we did, you know, let them work remotely on clerical days, on professional learning days, let them leave campus and do their prep time remote at the end of the day. Any way that we could advantage our staff, we did. I defaulted everybody to proficient, right? They're teaching in a pandemic. Don't worry about us coming, you know, into your classroom and stressing you out. So I would definitely say that, you know, teachers matter most. It's in the research everywhere. So as much as we can take care of our teachers, they usually step up and do what we need them to do for our students. And then the only other thing I'll say is I'm a big believer, you know, a lot of us are superintendents and principals. I think all of us have communication degrees because the better the communicator you are, the better that you can move massive. I mean, we basically reformed school districts in a matter of a couple months. And the ones of us that had a pretty strong success rate, regardless of our model, we all somehow were able to be very strategic and very proficient communicators with all the stakeholders from the board, you know, down to families, to everybody. So I just think that's a key place, and, you know, being strategic about it is really, really critical.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you to all of our participants, all of the panelists and everyone who joined in. The contact information for all of our panelists is on your screen. I'm sure that any of us would be willing to answer questions or provide feedback if you have follow-up, you know, the things that you think of leaving this session. Along those lines as well, there is going to be a follow-up session on May 12th. That will just sort of be an open office hours kind of session that that I will be participating in. So any of the participants, if you have questions coming out of this session or any of the other sessions, please look for the link for that and join us on May 12th. Here's your exit slip. Please make sure that you do submit your attendance for this session using the link that is there. The exit code for this session is 12697. And again, thank you to all of the participants for taking your time today to engage in this great conversation about scheduling and transitions and the lessons that we learned. I have appreciated hearing your insights, and I learned a lot from you. And I hope that the folks that sat in on this session did as well. So thank you all.